No! No! I'm not mad at you. Show your face. I'm sorry. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Oh! Right out for right. Out for right. Out for right. Out for right.
Action continues to the fatal shooting of a woman by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. 37-year-old Renee Good was a mother of three who had just moved to the city. Her family described her as loving and kind. The Trump administration described her as a domestic terrorist.
You asked about a shooting that we just had in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was an act of domestic terrorism.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey didn't mince words when he reacted to the killing.
Your stated reason for being in the city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite. Long-term Minneapolis residents that have contributed so greatly to our city, to our culture, to our economy are being terrorized, and now somebody is dead.
I want to find out more about what our rights are in regards to ICE, regardless of immigration status, how far ICE agents can go legally, and where we're headed as a country. But before we unpack all of that, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit subscribe. Here's my conversation with ACLU Texas Policy and Advocacy Strategist for Border and Immigrants' Rights, Sarah Cruz. I just want to jump right in. You know, watching the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, and also watching the subsequent defense of the killing by the Trump administration, I wanted to start by talking about the increase of ICE presence in cities across the United States and the potential dangers that may pose. Can we start by talking about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is, and this was a horrific tragedy, right? I think first and foremost, we just kind of want to acknowledge that. And you know, this is also something it demonstrates really a lot of the concerns that our organizations like the ACLU of Texas have been highlighting since even before the administration took office, about the concerns of increased immigration enforcement in our communities, and how that doesn't make our communities actually safer, but that it increases the fear in our community and really undermines a lot of the public safety efforts of our local police, as well as just not a focus on any of these people that really pose a threat to our communities and, again, to our public safety. And so, you know, the tragedy that happened the other day is really just emblematic of how an increase in immigration enforcement can be extremely harmful to communities.
What are you hearing from people in immigrant communities and cities that you are all in contact with that has an increase in ICE presence? What are they saying? How are they feeling?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Texas is no stranger to having an increase of immigration enforcement, right? We've had an increase in immigration enforcement over the last several years. One, because of our state's own program, but two, most recently, our state. So earlier, just a couple days ago, right, the beginning of this year, we had a new law that took effect, Senate Bill 8, that really requires our local sheriffs to collaborate with ICE through a 287G program. So we have already started to see a lot of that happen. Even before that, we've started to see, right, collaboration with immigration enforcement. And we have heard that a lot of communities, so last year, you might have remembered that there was some awful flooding that happened in central Texas. And so we had heard as a result of that, people were seeking services. And however, unfortunately, because of that immigration enforcement, we were hearing that people were reluctant to even seek services after these devastating floods. So that's one thing. We've also heard people have fears of, taking their kids to school, just kind of continuing with their everyday. So one, it impacts their everyday well-being. But second, we know what those very, very real impacts can look like when there is an interaction with immigration enforcement, right? Family separation, a person potentially going deported or removed to a place that they have never called home or haven't been to in decades. So we've heard a lot of these different stories and really have started to see it really play out on the ground, unfortunately.
And I was also wondering about the other side of that coin in terms of we're seeing now, obviously in reaction to the killing of Renee Good, we're seeing protests in Minneapolis across different cities. We had one here in Dallas the other night, and we're seeing videos on social media of people getting into it with ICE agents. Could this be a potential powder keg because of the way this program has been rolled out?
I mean, I definitely, this program has been rapidly rolled out, and I think the other thing that is very, you know, concerning to communities is really the tactics that have been used, right? In a lot of these things. I mean, in Texas, we have heard about which has happened in other cities across the country, right? We've heard about things like the use of tear gas. We have heard about instances in Texas.
Right.
Individuals are having the electricity to their homes cut in an effort to try and make these arrests happen. So I think a lot of this is, you know, a very real frustration with the tactics and how aggressively immigration enforcement officers are coming for community members, and community members that have been here oftentimes for decades, right? That have a real, you know, that have called, you know, Texas, or have called the United States their home, and have a very, you know, are part of the community.
And has there been that conversation among advocates about questioning how these agents are even trained? Like, because we have seen those tactics, and they're just, I'm not even in law enforcement. That doesn't seem like that would be the proper way to go about questioning someone, if that's even what the initial goal was. I mean, these are just, some of them are quite, could be terrifying for someone if you were the subject of that.
For sure. And I think one thing that we have highlighted in particular about, and I'm referring back to the 287G program, but again, referring because this is, we're placing that power, right, in a lot of the local law enforcement's hands. And so that's one thing that we have raised about that program. And in particular, the part of the program where people sign up, where law enforcement signs up for a task force model of this program. So they're actually doing this type of enforcement out in the community. That program in particular only has a 40-hour online training. And so we have raised that because now you're placing that power of the federal government into local law enforcement. And really that starts to get into, you know, these are things where, again, if you have 40 hours of training to do this out in the community, that raises strong concerns for us.
And, you know, we had mentioned the 287G agreement, that here in Texas, we have that, and some other states have that as well. If you're what rights do, I guess, cities and states have where ICE has an increased presence in which they do not want them there?
So I think that's going to depend on probably either on the city, county, and also in the state. So I can speak from Texas perspective. In Texas, back in 2017, there was some litigation that kind of happened afterwards, but SB 4 from 2017 was passed. And as a result, you know, currently Texas law enforcement agencies cannot make a policy that says you can't prohibit our local law enforcement from collaborating or providing support to immigration enforcement. So there is, in Texas, again, there's not, it is a little bit trickier because of some of those existing policies that kind of take away a little bit of that local control and local government's ability to make some of those policies that could prevent some of this collaboration. So it will depend a little bit, I think, where you are. But it also, you know, I think in this moment, it's like, what can some of those local governments do to try and mitigate some of that harm? Can they start, you know, sharing Know Your Rights information, things like that, to help at least community members prepare and feel a little bit safer as there's an increase of enforcement?
And on your point about people knowing their rights, in the Good shooting, we saw that she was in the vehicle, the ICE approached, and I'm not going to, you know, go over what, because I know we can't talk about that specifically, but if someone is approached by an ICE agent in their vehicle, what are their rights?
Well, they do. I mean, and I will also direct you to our website, because it does have a lot of that Know Your Rights information when you're in the car, you're on the street, or even in those sensitive locations. So an individual, if they're, you know, questioned about their immigration status, they do have their Fifth Amendment right to invoke and not answer questions about their immigration status or how they entered the United States. And then, they also have the Fourth Amendment right. And so we've been doing a lot of Know Your Rights presentations where I want to acknowledge the fact that a lot of people do have questions of where, what happens if my rights, I know my rights, but are they even going to be protected? And I think one of the things that I have tried to kind of stress in some of those presentations is, yes, we can't guarantee that your rights won't be violated, but the first step is knowing what those rights are in order for us to identify when they've been violated. And so again, you have your Fifth Amendment right, you have your Fourth Amendment right, free from unreasonable searches and seizures. You have the right as well to not sign any documents without an attorney present. So our Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights, definitely we stress those. And again, I'll encourage you to, and anybody else listening to please check our website for our Know Your Rights information.
And there's also a sense of, because you brought up a good point, even if someone is well aware of their rights, that does not mean that they will not be violated. So if someone finds themselves in that situation and they are out in public, are there some things that they can do to kind of keep themselves as safe as possible?
We have, so there's one, we have told individuals, if you're out, if you feel that you may be at risk of, of immigration enforcement, you feel like you may be at risk of being apprehended or risk of deportation, to start making those plans ahead of time, to start having, where are your documents? If you're arrested or detained in a facility, who is going to take care of your children? So those are one things, right? Having those preparedness plans and making sure that you get all of your things in order. Again, it's not to scare people when we tell them those things. It's really just so they're, you're prepared for anything, right? So that's one thing. Another thing that we'll say is to also document a lot of these things. An individual has the right to record, as long as they don't interfere with the operations of the officers. So that's the second piece, is really to document as much of these interactions with law enforcement, get as much information down as we can. That's another thing that we stress during our Know Your Rights presentations, is to try and collect as much information as you can about that specific interaction, whether it's like the agency, a badge number, the location, things like that. And then the other is also to, if you have felt that your rights have been violated, to seek legal services. So one thing is our organization has an intake line, but we also refer people out to other legal services. So we have a page kind of on our website for that.
According to ProPublica, more than 170 U.S. citizens have been detained by ICE, and at least 20 were held incommunicado. And around that, in that space, the Supreme Court last year allowed ICE in LA to take race into consideration. And then Justice Brett Kavanaugh said citizens shouldn't be concerned. What's your response to that, and also to the disconnect between what's in the law and what's really happening on the ground in terms of, this program and racial profiling?
Yeah, this demonstrates really, right, that immigration enforcement doesn't just impact, people who are undocumented or might have some sort of, don't have lawful status or things like that, or they're maybe not legal permanent resident. But this demonstrates just how that impacts people who already have, who are U.S. citizens or who already have status, right? That we've also seen this happen where we've heard cases of DACA recipients as well who have been arrested and detained. And so I think, one that should, again, one demonstrates how this impacts U.S. citizens. But I think the other piece of this is these programs, again, it kind of goes back to placing that role of the federal government into local law enforcement hands, right? You have 40 hours of online training. It starts to beg the question of, how are you going to enforce programs like these? How are you going to, one thing in particular about the 287G program is they have really incentivized that task force model, the most invasive model, with funding. And so it begs the question of, like, how are you going to enforce that? How are you going to reach those sort of those goalposts of where you're going to get funding. And I think that for us is it going to result in racial profiling? One report that I often flag is a report that our national office had released that covered kind of some of the agencies that were already in 287G agreements. And I believe they had found that about 65% of those agencies had engaged in either racial profiling or unconstitutional policing, and they were in these programs. And so it's just had such a long track record of being linked to racial profiling that really, raises alarms for us.
And I think you make a good point about when these types of policies are attached to funding, because then the goal becomes something else.
How do you?
The Trump administration says the goal of this is to make cities safer. However, if you're living somewhere where that municipality is in need of extra funding, then that totally changes the game, right?
It does. And we saw this a lot during, so I don't know how familiar you are with the program Operation Lone Star, but
yes.
we saw this with that program in particular. There was communities that didn't want to sign up for this because they knew, especially along the border, because they knew we have a lot of mixed status families here. We have a lot of residents who are undocumented or even just are concerned about having that immigration enforcement increase there. And we're reluctant to really sign up for Operation Lone Star, but because of that sort of entanglement of funding or that promise of funding, we saw counties sign up for it, even when they might have not been fully aligned with the program.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but legally, when we talked before about even before the fatal shooting in Minneapolis, there have been videos of ICE agents using what looks like to me a layperson excessive force to most people, or people being chased and things of that nature, tactics that you wouldn't expect to see. Are there could any of these agents be held accountable legally for some of their actions, or do they have carte blanche to take these types of tactics?
So, I mean, that I would love for one of our attorneys to dig a little bit deeper into this, but I will say that is something that has come up a lot and that we have raised even to some of these local communities. And I think even in particular to Dallas, because of when we recently saw that promise of 25 million, we raised that it doesn't fully protect you. While you are in agreement with ICE, that it doesn't fully protect the local communities from potential litigation. And we have seen that happen to local communities. I know one case in particular that might be familiar to you is Sheriff Arpaio in Arizona. So that is an example of costly litigation that resulted from a 287G agreement. And it was because that sheriff's office was engaging in racial profiling under their 287G agreement.
I remember when this program was first being doled out, and of course they said they were going after criminals and people that should be out of society, and there were a lot of people on board with that, but we saw that that's not who the administration was going after. And I was wanting to ask you what you're hearing on the ground from people when they're seeing neighbors, community members, family members that have been here for a long time that are just, they're beloved in their neighborhoods and communities. What are they saying about the change in what people thought was going to happen versus the reality of what we are seeing?
And that's something that I mean, even me personally, that I've heard, right? I'm actually a border resident. So I'm originally from the RGB, and I think that this is something that a lot of people, even there, probably didn't expect, right? That, I didn't think it was going to happen to our restaurant owner, or I didn't think it was going to happen to the churchgoer. And we hear that a lot. And unfortunately, I mean, this is something that a lot of organizations try to raise, is that, we have seen the criminalization of people in Texas over the last several years. And I think could see the writing on the wall for a lot of this, right, before the administration took office, and continue to raise this impacts an increase in immigration enforcement is not going to just impact the people that might have a criminal background, or the people that might be arriving at the border and seeking asylum. This is going to impact everybody in our community, whether directly or whether it's someone that you know or a family member. And so it has been very tough, I think, for a lot of communities at this time. And even if even just have to see the things on TV where you're seeing those people being arrested at the ICE check-ins or at the immigration court, wondering why. And so, yeah. I don't remember the first part of your question, but yeah, I was just kind of, yeah, it's been tough.
Oh no, but I understand. I mean, I was following along because this scenario has just expanded in scope and increased so rapidly. I think a lot of people are struggling to wrap their heads around it, and also too about where this is going to end, because this is something that I think we're still seeing an escalation.
Yeah, I mean that's. Yeah, oh no, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think about that a lot, right? Because yeah, it is, at what point does it stop? And I think we have had that question for a while. We had that under Operation Lone Star. If you have an administration that's acting more aggressively, at what point does that end? And I think we never even got that question answered. There was never an end goal that was delivered to Texas residents. It was always, we need to do this, but there was never a goal that needed to be met. And I think that was I mean, to me, that still hasn't been answered. What is the end goal?
Right, and also to the on the other side of that, the cost, because we saw with Operation Lone Star the millions of dollars that it cost, and when it came to what their initial, they didn't have a goal, but what they said they were going to do, it just didn't seem to match up to the public in terms of how much money was spent versus what actually happened.
No, exactly. And I think that's, we often say in our organization, and I know we share, a lot of my colleagues share kind of this, some similar opinion, that Texas was the blueprint for a lot of how the administration was going to roll out this on a wider national scale. And we have seen that play out. We've seen that through the incentivization, right? The incentivizing of the task force model, getting local communities to sign up for that agenda. And we're seeing those impacts right now, unfortunately. And so I remember during the legislative session, we pointed back to, you're going to put this mandate on our local law enforcement, but you've already seen over the last several years what that looks like. And our organization had released a report last year that kind of said similar things. You are targeting and arresting individuals that pose no threat to public safety and are wasting billions of dollars to do this. And oftentimes a lot of the people that were arrested under that program had low-level offenses.
And on that note, when things like this happen, a lot of times people who feel that they may not be impacted directly tend to just look the other way. And I was wondering if in cases like these, if this is a scenario that can really get everyone's attention, because we're seeing, as I said in the ProPublica report, at least 170 US citizens had been detained by ICE. So this could be a scenario where maybe certain powers get expanded and everyone could be impacted by something like this. I just want to know your thoughts about that and what you would say to someone who may not be as invested in what's going on right now, about why they should get informed about this situation.
Sure. I mean, I think there's two things that I'm thinking about right now. So on one end, right, it's seeing the potential of, like, we have already seen people that are US citizens, that are DACA recipients, that are lawful permanent residents, individuals who don't have a criminal background, that are being arrested, being detained, and spending time in detention facilities. So this is something that we've already seen. So if that's, that's one thing. And I think, but for somebody who may feel, okay, well, how is this doesn't impact me at all in any way, shape, or form. I am none of that the following that would fall under any categories. For that person, I think I would say is kind of how we've been approaching this in Texas is, okay, if we want to look at it that way, let's look at the needs of your community. What needs are being left out of your community? What isn't being met? Is it housing? Is it funding for new roads? Is it better schools? Is it something with the infrastructure in your local community? Is that being left unmet? And if it is, what is the reason? Is it funding? Is it X, Y, and Z? Are your local officials, are state officials focusing on other things, funding other things, when in reality, that has no benefit to our communities? Whereas this other thing that they could fund, that school, that hospital, that new road, that would actually benefit your community instead of funding, another 287G agreement.
And so just to circle back from where we started, I wanted to ask you about the Renee Good shooting, because we've been seeing over the past couple of months an increase in the tactics that ICE agents were using, and each time it was just ratcheted up even more. And now we've seen that a woman was fatally shot. Do you think that this particular incident, tragedy, could that be the tipping point where even public officials, people in Congress, are going to step in to say enough is enough with these tactics?
That's a really good question. I mean, I would say that from our position, I would think that we would probably say like enough is enough had probably passed a long time ago, because so much harm has already happened. But this one's tough. but I think I would probably say that it does you caught me off guard on that one. But I guess I would say that for us, enough is enough has passed. But I mean, I think I'm hoping that this will lead to conversations about what the right solutions are, and hope that this will take us to solutions that don't result in more harm and actually address what we need to help. One, at the immigration level, how can we support the individuals in our communities, the cities that are receiving immigrants? And so I think that's where I'm hopeful. So I mean, it's an unfortunate, horrific tragedy, but I think that's what I hope for happens next is, can we get to the solutions? Can we finally find some middle ground after this?